you sent the last text 3 days ago. And now you're sitting there checking your phone every 20 minutes, wondering what you did wrong, why they've gone completely silent, and whether this is just their thing or if it's actually over. Meanwhile, they're out there living their life like you barely exist. And somehow that silence is louder than anything they've ever said to you. Here's what's wild about this situation. The thing most people do next, the reaching out, the explaining, the "hey, just checking in" message, that's the exact move that makes an avoidant pull even further away. And if you've been in this cycle more than once, you already know that feeling. You try harder, they retreat further. You back off, suddenly they resurface. It feels like a game you never agreed to play. This channel, Deep Healing, exists because these patterns deserve a real honest conversation. Not surface-level advice, but the psychological truth behind why avoidants behave the way they do and what actually shifts their behavior. What we're getting into today is that specific thing, that shift in you, that makes an avoidant not just come back, but come back differently. Let's start at the root of it all. An avoidant person, whether they're fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant, didn't develop that attachment style because they're broken or heartless. They developed it because at some point, usually early in life, closeness felt dangerous. Maybe the people they loved most were emotionally inconsistent. Maybe vulnerability got them hurt or dismissed. So they built an internal system that says, if I don't need you, you can't disappoint me. That system runs automatically. They don't sit around thinking, I'm going to pull away now. It just happens. The moment connection starts to feel real, feels intense, feels like it matters, something in them gets triggered and they create distance. Not because they don't feel anything, often because they feel too much and it terrifies them. Think about that for a second. The person who acts the most unbothered is often the most overwhelmed. The person who goes silent isn't empty. They're flooded. So, here's where most people get it completely wrong. They think the goal is to make the avoidant feel safe by showing up more. More patience, more reassurance, more availability. And that feels logical, right? If someone is afraid of closeness, you make closeness feel gentle and low pressure. Except, that's not how their nervous system works. When you're always there, always reaching, always available, you become the pressure. Even if you're the warmest, most understanding person alive, constant emotional availability reads to an avoidant as intensity. And intensity is exactly what triggers their withdrawal reflex. So, what actually moves an avoidant? What makes them stop retreating and start chasing? Here's where it gets genuinely interesting and a little counterintuitive. What pulls and sews avoidant back isn't more warmth. It's your absence of need for them, not playing games, not fake distance, not the silent treatment designed to punish them. I'm talking about something that runs much deeper than tactics. I'm talking about the moment you genuinely shift your energy. When you stop organizing your emotional life around whether or not they're showing up. There's a term in attachment psychology called the rubber band effect. The idea is that avoidants have this internal tension. They want closeness and they fear it simultaneously. When you're constantly available, you remove the tension. There's no distance to close. But the moment you genuinely step back, not as a move, but because you're actually redirecting your own energy, that tension snaps back, and they feel it. But here's the thing most people miss when they hear this. They try to manufacture that distance. They go quiet for a few days, hoping the avoidant will notice. And sometimes they do notice, but it doesn't create the deeper shift we're talking about, because the energy underneath it is still, I'm waiting for you. Avoidants can feel that. They're actually very perceptive about emotional undercurrents, which is ironic given how emotionally guarded they are. The shift we're talking about has to be real. It happens inside you first. Stop being emotionally predictable. Imagine someone named Marcus. He'd been seeing a woman, Sophia, for about 4 months. Things were good, until they suddenly weren't. She started taking longer to respond, making plans and canceling. being warm one week and distant the next. Marcus, who genuinely cared about her, did what most people do. He stayed consistent. He kept checking in, kept showing up with kindness, kept making himself available. He told himself he was being the secure partner. But Sophia kept pulling further back. Then something shifted. Not a strategy, but a real change. Marcus got tired. Not angry tired, just genuinely done with organizing his emotional state around her unpredictability. He started saying yes to things he'd been putting off. He reconnected with a friend group he had been neglecting. He stopped looking at his phone, expecting her name on the screen. Within 2 weeks, Sophia started reaching out more. Not dramatically, but the frequency changed. The tone changed. She started asking what he was doing, where he'd been, who he was with. What happened there? Marcus became unpredictable. And for an avoidant, unpredictability in someone they're attached to activates their attachment system in a way that constant, reliable availability never does. The psychology behind this is tied to something called intermittent reinforcement in reverse. Except in this case, you're not strategically withholding, you're genuinely becoming less focused on them. And that creates a kind of emotional curiosity they can't manufacture reasons to ignore. So, what do you do with this? You identify the ways you've been emotionally predictable, not just in texting frequency, but in your whole posture toward them. Are you always the one who softens after tension? Are you always the one who reaches back first? Are you organizing your weekend hoping they'll suggest plans? Start noticing those patterns, because every single one of those behaviors, no matter how loving they are, signals to an avoidant that you'll always be there, and that removes the activation signal their attachment system needs. Reactivate their curiosity without performing. Here's what's fascinating about avoidant psychology. And I mean genuinely fascinating, not in a manipulative way. Avoidants are attracted to people who have rich inner worlds they can't fully access. Think about who first attracted them to you. Probably not when you were most vulnerable or most available. It was probably when you were deeply involved in something. Your work, a passion, a story you were telling that had nothing to do with them. There was a version of you they found intriguing because they couldn't fully possess your attention. That version of you didn't go anywhere, but it might have gotten buried under the weight of trying to make this relationship work. There's a woman named Priya who came to understand this the hard way. She'd been in an on and off situation with a guy, Daniel, for almost 2 years. Every time she pulled back, he'd come forward. Every time she got close, he'd create friction. She was exhausted. Then, less out of strategy and more out of self-preservation, she threw herself into a photography project she'd been postponing for years. She started posting the work. She started having conversations with people in that creative space. She had less mental bandwidth to obsess over Daniel. He noticed a shift, not just in her behavior, in her energy. She talked about things she was excited about. She had less emotional bandwidth to manage his moods. She wasn't cold. She was just full. Her life felt full. That's what reactivated his curiosity. Because suddenly he wasn't just wondering, does she want me? He was wondering, who is she becoming? And is there space for me there? Avoidants, for all their emotional distancing, are drawn to depth. They don't fear intimacy with someone who has their own gravity. What they fear is being someone else's whole world, because that level of need feels suffocating to them. When you become genuinely absorbed in your own growth, you stop feeling like a weight. You start feeling like an invitation. So, what do you do here? Reconnect with something you've put on the back burner. Not as a performance. Find something that genuinely excites you and put real energy into it. Let that energy be visible, not staged, just real. This isn't about making them jealous. It's about becoming the version of yourself that has its own momentum. Shift the emotional power dynamic without games. Okay, let's get real honest here for a second. The reason Avoidants keep pulling away from certain people and not others has a lot to do with who holds the emotional weight in the dynamic. In almost every case where someone is anxiously waiting on an avoidant, there's a power imbalance, and both people can feel it, even if neither names it. When you're the one who needs the reassurance, who needs the clarity, who needs them to show up in a specific way so you can feel okay, even if your needs are completely reasonable and fair, you're carrying the emotional charge of the relationship. And avoidance, without even consciously deciding to, will lean away from whoever is holding that charge. Here's the uncomfortable truth most videos won't say plainly. Some of the behaviors that feel like love to you, the patience, the understanding, the giving them space while secretly waiting, might actually be coming from a place of anxiety dressed up as generosity. And avoidants sense that undercurrent. They don't respond to what you're doing. They respond to why you're doing it. This is the difference between someone who offers space because they genuinely respect autonomy versus someone who offers space because they're terrified of pushing the avoidant further away. The behavior looks identical. The energy is completely different. When a person named James finally stopped tolerating inconsistency from his partner, not in a punishing way, just in a clear, calm, this doesn't work for me way, something in the dynamic shifted almost immediately. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cold. He just had a boundary he held without drama. His partner, who had been pulling away for weeks, suddenly became much more present. Not because James had played a card, but because James had stopped playing at all. So, what do you do with this? You audit the emotional weight you're carrying. Ask yourself, am I patient because I'm secure? Or am I patient because I am afraid of what happens if I'm not? Am I giving space because it's genuinely healthy? Or because I'm hoping it will bring them back? The answer changes your energy, and your energy is what they're actually reading. Start holding light but firm expectations, not ultimatums. Those create panic and avoidance and almost always backfire. But quiet, steady evidence that your time has value, that you don't chase, and that you're okay either way. That okay either way energy is the most attractive thing you can bring into an avoidant dynamic. Not because it makes them worry they will lose you, but because it makes you genuinely equal in the dynamic, maybe for the first time. The moment they actually come back now. Here's where it gets critical, because people do this work, the genuine work, the inner shift, and then the avoidant starts showing up again, and everything we just talked about gets abandoned in about 48 hours. They send a warm text. You feel that flood of relief. They suggest getting together. The whole cycle restarts, except now. You're back to orbiting them, relieved they returned, and within weeks they sense that energy and begin withdrawing again. The return of an avoidant is not the finish line. It's actually the most important test of whether anything has genuinely changed. When someone who has been distant comes back toward you, and this is true of anyone but especially avoidance, the worst thing you can do is signal that all is forgiven and everything's fine with a single warm interaction. Not because you should punish them, but because if you immediately reset back to your old dynamic, you've both confirmed that nothing has changed. They'll file that away. And the cycle continues. What actually moves things forward is continuing to be the person you became while they were away. Keep your projects, keep your social plans. Let the reconnection happen at a real pace, not an anxious relief pace. Be warm, be genuine, but don't collapse back into being their emotional anchor before they've demonstrated. They're showing up differently too. This is where you get to find out something important. Are they returning because they genuinely want more closeness with you? Or are they returning because your absence triggered their attachment system, and now that you're back, they'll gradually retreat again? The answer will show itself over time, but only if you stay grounded. Only if you hold on to the version of yourself you've been building. Here's the thing nobody talks about when we discuss avoidance coming back. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't them running back to you. Sometimes it's you realizing, from a grounded, secure place, that you're no longer running after them either. that you've done enough inner work that you can be genuinely open to the relationship, genuinely warm, genuinely connected, and still be okay if it doesn't unfold the way you hoped. That's not giving up. That's the opposite of giving up. That's showing up as the most whole, most attractive, most real version of yourself, not to engineer a specific outcome, but because you're finally done abandoning yourself to keep someone else close. When you get there, when it's no longer about tactics or timelines or reading their behavior for clues, something remarkable tends to happen. Either the avoidant in your life feels that gravity and genuinely moves towards you, or you find that you've grown into someone who attracts connections that don't require this much decoding. Both of those outcomes are a win, and you won't see it that way until you stop outsourcing your peace to someone else's ability to show up. That's where the real work starts, and honestly, that's where everything changes. If this hits something true for you, something you've been trying to put into words for a while, stay with that feeling. It usually means there's more here worth exploring. The next step isn't another strategy. It's understanding what in you got pulled into this dynamic in the first place. That's the conversation worth having.